Hi, everyone. My name is Quodesia DeVay Johnson. I also go by Quo Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I have the honor of being the company culture consultant for the Dallas Opera. I'm also an equity specialist and racial healing practitioner, as well as a social justice advisor for Opera America. Thank you all so much for giving us your time today for this virtual session of the Heart Institute for Women Conductors. Special thank you to the Dallas Opera and to the supporters of the Heart Institute. Before we officially get started, I'd like to begin with the Dallas Opera's Land and People Acknowledgement. As an organization that is rooted here in Dallas and that is rooted in storytelling, we are committed to belonging and ensuring that we tell as much of the story as possible because that's what we excel in. So I'd like to officially acknowledge that we are creating stories and music and art on the ancestral land of the Caddo, Wichita, and Comanche sovereign nations. I also want to acknowledge that in this space of community, Dallas is built on land with stolen labor. As a descendant of enslaved people, I share this never to cast blame, of course, but to invite us to consider how we all came to be together here in Dallas and in our respective places, and that we have the opportunity, the responsibility, and the honor to speak truth to the stories that we know, as well as to work together to build a better world and a better community. So I thank you for joining us in acknowledging the land and the people. As we talk today, we're going to get into bias. That means many, many things. We're going to break down what biases are, and we have a beautiful panel of brilliant individuals who will share about their experiences and how they work to acknowledge and recognize bias and to move beyond that to build greater collaboration and communication and community with one another. I cannot do them justice because they are also fly in so many ways. So I ask, can you let us know who you are and tell us what brought you to opera, beginning with Alfrelynn?
Good morning, evening,
Yeah.
afternoon, I should say. My name is Alfrelynn Robards. I am an arts administrator. I'm a singer. I'm a conductor. I am currently the director of artistic planning and operations for Portland Opera. And I am from Big D, Little A,
Hey.
Double L A S. And have grown up there and still move between Portland and Dallas quite frequently. Um, and I started in church choir, just like most do. And my mother was a pianist
Nice.
and a music educator. And so music was always a part of our world. I sensed that my voice was a little bit different from the church choir. And although I was accepted for the voice that I had, I just felt a little out of place. And
Okay.
then I went to high school. I went to the Arts Magnet High School, which is now the Booker T. Washington High School for the Visual and Performing Arts there in Dallas. And all of a sudden, these big voices
Mm.
met me and I met them and I was like, okay, I'm home now. And that's how I got introduced to opera. My very first opera on the stage there at Booker T was I'm All in the Night Visitors.
Mhm.
And I was in the chorus. The next year we did Noah's Flood. I was actually, I think, Ham's wife or something. So that's how I got introduced to opera, and that it has just been a part of my world ever since.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Amy, let us know who you are and what brought you to opera.
I'm Amy Campbell, and I'm actually from Portland, Oregon, but I live in Big
Yay.
D.
Yay. So
So
we
we've
swapped.
I try to get back to Portland every year, but it doesn't always happen. Um, so growing up there, my parents were not musicians, but my mom did play. She got us all started
Mm.
playing piano, and I started on violin. And we were season ticket holders to the symphony and the opera, and my violin teacher played in the opera at the time, and so grew up
Mm.
going to all the operas and symphony that I could from a really young age. And actually, my first job was Portland Opera. I played in the first violin section there during college. But then, yeah, I played in symphony orchestras around the country, and they all had the option to do the opera. Like in Seattle, you can play the year, but you can also play the opera. And so everywhere I was, I would do that. And I just loved the whole process. How you first rehearsal, it's just the orchestra, you're getting to know the score, then you add the singers, but they're not in costume, and then you have your rehearsals, you know, all the way. And the fact that the fourth performance is going to be so different from the first performance, and that everyone, you know, when you're backstage, you see the costuming and the hair people and the conductor and the singers, everybody's a part of this big thing. I love that. And so when we got the opportunity to move here, my husband plays in the symphony here, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I had small children, and so I was excited to join the opera here. And I have to tell you, I didn't think I'd be here my 16th season and sitting concertmaster, but it's just been great. So I love opera, always have.
Wonderful. Welcome, and thank you for sharing. Casey, let us know who you are. What brought you to opera?
Hello, everyone. I'm Casey Robards, and I live in Champaign, Illinois. I actually should maybe mention that my first opera contract was with Portland also, oddly, but I didn't go because I got a job offer that came along around the same time, and it was an academic job. I went to Indiana instead, and because it was a 9-month contract, or 2-year contract. So I thought, okay, well, that's a little bit more going there. So I ended up I've never been to Portland. So we have to change that. But anyway, I'm a pianist and a vocal coach. I began my musical life as a pianist very young, and no one else was a musician in my family. I was adopted from South Korea at 8 months. So I grew up in rural Illinois. And my Korean name, I've been saying it and putting it in my bio because maybe I will find some birth family or relatives or something, but my Korean name is An Sojung. So that's another long story. But I found myself in a very private world of music where I could express what I felt and thought in a language that no one else really understood or cared about or spoke. And maybe that was a protection in a way. I mean, it was an outlet that I had. But because I was in a small town, and because I was sort of a overachieving kid, I suppose, I started playing as a church pianist in 6th grade, and I played for Guys and Dolls at the High School Musical when I was in 8th grade. And so I did a lot of accompanying as a child. So the world of collaboration opened up for me pretty young. And when I went to college, I started doing a lot of accompanying, which led to me becoming a vocal coach after playing for years and years of oodles and noodles of voice lessons and getting to know singers. First opera I saw was a magic flute with piano in English when I was 17. I don't know. I mean, obviously, the first time anyone hears The Queen of the Night, that's always sort of a moment that you can never forget, at least the tune. And I really fell in love with singers and enjoyed my experiences as a repetiteur and coach, something I still do a lot of. And then my journey to becoming an opera conductor happened actually fairly recently. So another 10 years, 15 years after I really started working as a coach.
Nice. Thank you so much, and welcome for our panelists. Joining us, we also have our current participants in the Hart Institute Women Conductors. I will ask that each of them introduce themselves. So just tell us your name and where you're from, and then we'll get into this conversation about bias, beginning with Anna.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Ana Castro Greenstein, and I am from Argentina.
Nice, welcome. Next, Jenan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jianan Chen. I am from China.
Wonderful, welcome. Valerie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Val, and I am also from Portland, Oregon. So, yay.
Shout out to Portland and Dallas making all
connections.
these connections together. Opera's a small world, I promise. CJ.
My name is CJ Wu. I'm from Taiwan.
Wonderful. And welcome to everyone. So thank you for allowing us a space for introductions. It's always important that we get to know who people are and that we create the space for people to bring themselves into the work as we shape the work together. It's an important part of collaboration that we'll get to later. So it's intentional, I promise. So let's get into this conversation about bias and biases. If you're like me, sometimes when you hear bias, there may be some anxiety, there may be some uncomfort or some discomfort. And sometimes managing or navigating a space of, did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? Did I cause unintentional harm? We're here to break down what a bias is, why recognizing them is important, and how we go through recognizing them and leading to greater collaboration. So a bias, this is the informal definition, everyone. A bias is when our brain pairs information together. It is when we group information together. So if I say 2 + 2 equals, everybody's going to say 4, right? Because that's what we've been taught. And numerically, that is true. When we have a certain experience, our brain starts to say, okay, when this happens, the next thing happens. When we hear someone tune to A440, that means it's time for us to be quiet because the orchestra is about to play. When we see that we push a button on the elevator, surely it should be going to that floor. So a bias is created when we have an experience and then our brain starts to say, let's assume that this is what's happening next. It is just our brain trying to create shortcuts for us based on prior experiences. So I'll give another example. Growing up, I'm from a very, very big family. My mom has a lot of siblings. In the kitchen in particular, for kind of ritualistic things, if you will, many of the women, aunts, aunties, great grandmother were in the kitchen. That was their space. Don't come in here. Or if you do come in, I hope you're contributing, right? That was just a way that they came together culturally. Uncles and everybody were on the grill. I assume that that's how it's supposed to go, and it has to go that way every time. And so my bias was formed in that, okay, a lot of my aunts will be in the kitchen, a lot of my uncles will be at the grill, until I learned that my mom is a master griller. Because I did not allow the opportunity to understand that just because this is how I saw it doesn't mean that's the only way it can go. I missed out on all of the opportunities for me to celebrate my mom and her skills. Bringing that into opera, if we assume that Mimi has to look a certain way, has to fit within a certain costume, we miss out on being able to cast and represent and celebrate so many other body types, so many other ethnicities and racial identities, cultural expressions, because we only assume it's one way. We all have biases because we have all been exposed to something that says this is what happens next. 2 + 2 = 4, right? This plus this goes together. That's how it has to happen. We're not always in control of those biases, right? We all have them. We're not always in control. I always give the example for those who know the tune, but, right? Whether you sing it or not, somebody's like, but, and if I say do it again, but don't do anything this time, but, you still heard it. You still heard it. You probably still did it if you know the tune, right? If you don't know the tune, then it's looking at the fact that not everybody knows it. Not everybody does the same thing. Sometimes we have biases that fill in the information for us, and we have the opportunity to acknowledge and recognize that bias and then choose to do something different. So for those who sang it the first time just because it's there, and then for those who told themselves not to sing it, but something else still happened. That's what a bias is, which means we all have it. It's just our brain trying to get this information to us so that we can make decisions. We often tend to have preferences with particular biases. We have a preference for a particular operatic style. We have a preference for particular tonal language. Then, if we always lean to those preferences and we don't make room for anything else or anyone else or any other way to do something, or we actively dismiss or demonize other forms of being or ways of doing things, that is when we lean into prejudice. So if I have a prejudice against certain works, if I have a prejudice against certain eras of music, it is because I have a preference based on my experience and my biases for something else. Does that make sense, everyone? Nice. Okay. So that quick breakdown of what a bias is means we all have it. We all have it no matter what. When we're looking at recognizing bias, it is recognized that we all have information in our head that tries to fill out the next thing, that tries to tell us this is what comes next. This is what has to happen next. All of us have it. It is what it means to be this beautiful human creature that we are. So when we're recognizing bias, it's important that we start there by saying, I do have a bias. It doesn't mean it's good or bad, but my brain assumes that this is what happens next. So I ask everyone, what do you think about when you hear the word bias? And I'm going to start with Amy.
Oh, that was a great explanation. I enjoyed that. Yeah, I think without giving it a lot of thought at first, it had a sinister kind of connotation for me. I mean, along the lines of prejudice, but maybe a little less, harsh, and kind of intentional, like if you have a bias. But I think the more I thought about it, I think a lot of it probably is like unintentional or more like unconscious, like you're saying, something you grew up with that maybe helped you navigate, helped you be comfortable. Like, this is the way I'm comfortable, and there's such a big world out there. I'm just going to keep being in my comfort zone, and so you're creating a bias without even kind of realizing that you're creating a bias, I think. So, yeah, I think realizing that we have so many little biases and big biases, and we have biases against us, that also that we may or may not be aware of. I think subtlety, body language, things that happen around us. Now that you've got me thinking about it, I'm seeing it everywhere.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And it's not always the immediate need to correct it, but to name it and to say, okay, and is that truth? Right? Does but come after but da 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 but yeah, if that's the tune we all know. So thank you for sharing that. Casey, what do you think about when you think about bias?
Oh my goodness, I go back and forth between this is a fight we have to fight, it's an everyday battle, it's like we have to do this work, like, come on everybody, get on board, to just like it's overwhelming, I'm exhausted, I need to get off this train because it's so constant. And I personally have spent a lot of time unlearning a lot of biases, or just like you said, naming them. I realized at some point, at some point when we ask ourselves, what did we grow up with, and what did we learn, and what did we inherit, and what are we breathing in around us in the air? Like, it's just pervasive, right? Of thoughts of, what is intelligent, who is beautiful, who is in charge, who deserves this. It's just constant when we have these ideas about how things are supposed to be or how they work. And sometimes we find ourselves left out of those equations if we just stick with those kind of stock answers, right? And so I found myself constantly being pushed to the side. I'm actually an athlete, and I found that playing sports was a way of sort of leveling the playing field, because if you can play, it doesn't matter if you're the only girl, because you can play. It's the same, it's the same sort of game once you get inside the lines. And so I would love for people to just be willing to look at bias in a kind of a neutral state, and continuing to educate ourselves, about the way other people are silenced or othered or left out. Look at history, look at data, look at news, the conversations that go on around us, just, to constantly examine all of these assumptions that we're making about what is valuable and about how things should be done. I teach very differently than how I was taught in many ways, because the world has changed. so much, even in the last 3 years, 5
Yeah.
years, you know, and now we're experiencing all kinds of, you know, whatever you want to
Things.
call it. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of tension in it, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I know we have a lot more to go, but I think that this constant examination is both necessary and hard.
Yeah.
And there's just
Yes.
no way around it. But it's very life-giving, and it's very freeing, and it can bring about so much creativity. So it's also kind of
Yeah.
exciting.
For sure. Thank you for sharing. Alfrelynn, let us know what comes to mind when you hear the word bias.
Yeah, I think, and I love Casey and Amy for their answers as well. And I think for me, bias is just about perspective. I mean, obviously, that's basically what we're talking about here. And it's what happens when your perspective or someone else's perspective infringes on somebody else. And those are the conversations I think that we have not had or are too hard to have sometimes, just because everybody has this need for their biases to be accepted.
Uh-huh.
And so obviously it's our experiences and our perspective. And if we are willing and open, just like Casey was saying, to looking at somebody else's perspective and taking that into account, I think life would be a lot easier. Because I don't have to necessarily, it's your perspective, it's your bias, it's my bias, I own it. It doesn't infringe on who I am. And as soon as it does, then we have a problem. But if we can stop infringing our own biases on other people, then I think, and also be willing to experience sometimes what they are experiencing. Because again, that just broadens your perspective, just as Casey and Amy were saying. Life would just be it would be a lot easier. It just would. You don't have to like it, but at least acknowledge that somebody else's opinion, perspective, and bias exist.
Yeah, for sure. And that your own exists.
And that my own exists, right?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And as we kind of look at preference, we know that since no person is void of bias, that means no space is exempt of bias, which means that opera has biases. Like, we got to talk about it. We get to talk about it. And we also get to talk about how acknowledging those biases allows us to open up for a collaboration, right? To address, is this working? Is this always true? If it's not working, and if it is not always true, which most of the time it's not, what else do we get to do in this grand art form of creativity? So I will actually ask Casey, can you let us know of an opera, or not an opera, of a bias that you held about opera that you've kind of started to address and debunk and deconstruct or redirect?
Yeah, there are lots that I could talk about, I think, that are a little bit more obvious. You know, it comes to casting, or it comes to who should be doing what, and but I'm also thinking about just the larger umbrella. I've been involved in a few productions that were called operas that maybe they should have been called music theater, or maybe they should have been called, one was a cyberpunk rock opera. So really it was rock, it was punk, it was like doo-wop and rap and gospel, and I mean it was all this other stuff, and it was amplified instruments, it was amplified voices. So it's like, is that really opera? But I finally decided, who cares? I mean, why fight over the terminology? Because it's unfortunate that the word opera brings to mind, like getting out of limos and fur coats, and the upper social whatever, circles, sung in a language that no one speaks around us, and that it's just sort of this out of touch, expensive venture. And it is expensive. I don't think we'll ever get around that. I mean, it's hard to get around that. But just to let the genre and let the people who are doing it to widen that scope might help us as an art form, or might help us as a company, or as an institution, or just as a artistic force, as we're trying to figure out how do we move forward with dwindling audiences and, you know, all the things. It's so hard to do already. So I would love to see more partnerships and more, you know, like open doors between institutions that never really talk to each other. I mean, it's in every college campus, it's like theater department and the music department that are the most siloed, or that, you know, that often don't interact. I guess if you want to be an actor and a singer, there's not even a pathway in the curriculum for it. It's so strange, you know. So I think that how do we do that? Well, you know, we have to build the relationships with folks that are in these different spheres. And so I think one of the hard parts about what we do is that it's such a long training period and long learning curve, and the canon is I mean, it's hard, it's massive, you know. So it can take all of our time, you know. I'm trying to learn French and Italian, German. That's why I haven't even gotten to Korean yet myself, you know. So how do we have the time, you know? But I think that may offer us some new pathways and more collaboration if we just loosen the whole idea of what is opera.
I love this very broad, like, what is opera? And opera being the sum of many works. Opera being the sum of all of these art forms coming together. Opera being the voice of the people at the time. Is opera the voice of the people now? Surely. What are the voices of the people saying, right? What are the people saying? Which people? How do we all come together? And in what genres and what mediums and what ways is opera playing a part in how we are telling our stories now? So definitely kind of one of the biases we have to recognize is what we believe opera is and is not. And I invite everyone who's watching this to also consider what opera can be once we acknowledge the biases we have. And is it working? Beautiful. My next question is for Amy. You're a concertmaster, and that's so cool. Could you let us know some of the biases you've experienced, some of those that you've held yourself? How did you work through that when it comes to, yes, music, but any other examples you have as well?
Yeah, I think, as mentioned before, we didn't have a lot of women in concertmaster roles or conductors to look to growing up. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. And I don't really remember seeing a woman concertmaster, or certainly not a conductor at that time, until, well, the first woman I really remember changing the narrative was Nadja Salerno-Sonnenberg. I don't remember if you guys remember her, but she was a violinist that came and played with Oregon Symphony in a pantsuit one day, you know, and I had never seen anybody wear pants, and I don't think she wore any makeup, maybe some red lipstick, and she played really aggressively, and she just didn't fit that norm. Like, you're the soloist, so where's your gown and like your fancy hair? And, you know, she wasn't a concertmaster, but she was showing us this music is gorgeous. She played the heck out of it. I think it was Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. But I remember that almost being scary to me. Like, wait a minute. You know, this is what I know. We just sit in the section, and if we're going to solo, we wear a pretty dress and we play beautifully. But, you know, even then there weren't a ton of female soloists. And shortly after that, I was with the Colorado Symphony with Marin Alsop, who was also friends with Nadja, and she brought her in a few times. But, and, you know, Marin would wear a pantsuit, and she would get up there, and she was such a strong role model. But what I remember seeing is that a lot of the people in the orchestra really weren't ready for her, you know, at that time. It was maybe 95, 96, something like that. So a lot has changed. You know, some of the younger women, we were so excited she was up there, but, and a lot of people supported her, but there were some very vocal voices that were pointing out everything she was not, you know, like she was not trying to be anything except herself. and she was a great director, you know. So it was really cool, but it was really kind of blew that thing I had in my head about what a conductor was, you know, and Naja about what a soloist was. So I was thinking about that in the years since. I've seen some fabulous female conductors and concertmasters, but I never thought I could do that because I'm a mom. And there were times when I would be asked to sit there and the question would be, you know, what was that going to be okay? Because I know you have kids and, you know, that kind of thing. And so I firmly believe that. I thought, well, is it going to be okay? Am I going to be able to like concentrate and bring what it needs, you know, because it was so ingrained in me. So I had this sort of bias against myself that I wasn't that strong woman like Naja or Maren. I wasn't, you know, actually the Concertmaster of Portland Opera, when I was there, she was a female and she was a very strong, fantastic concertmaster, Laura Lisa Gantz. But I saw those women as different from me, you know, because they were so strong. So all along it was still, I couldn't push it aside and really look at why I wasn't doing it until I had just done it so much that all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I'm doing this and other women can do it. And, you know, I see women all around me doing it. It's like all in 20 years, it's become very normalized. And this is what I love about the Heart Institute is every year we see, you know, a bunch of women up there, whether they're assistants for us or Nicole Paimont or the young conductors. It's just become something very normal to see. So for all the new people joining the orchestra, I'm hoping they have a whole different reality, you know, and they don't create that bias at least.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. What I appreciate is that you named that it was scary. It was wonderful and it was brilliant and they were powerful and strong and it was inspiring and it was scary because oftentimes when we are experiencing something new or trying something new, our brain is looking for the information that we already have as we create new experiences and as our brain starts to say, okay, it doesn't have to be this way, but we have to pause and ask the question, can it be another way? And is this other way working? And I love that you also shared honestly that you didn't see yourself being able to do those things, right? And here you are doing that. And I will say also representing that opportunity for so many others who won't question it because they see it all the time, right? We don't question it as much when we see it. And for those who are not used to seeing it, that very scary, very real, and very rewarding journey of saying there are other ways to do this. If we limit our spaces to only one identity or a few shared identities or dominant identities, then we miss out on all the other ways that human beings come together to collaborate. We miss out on all these other beautiful, wonderful, extremely skilled musicians or average musicians who can hold the tune, right? We miss out on being able to make music with so many other people when we don't acknowledge that there may be a bias that says that person doesn't belong here. Or there may be a bias that says I don't belong here. And that's right, one of the things we get to conquer in a way. Alfrelynn, can you let us know? You have so many different experiences. Being in front of the table, the casting table, we say, being behind the casting table, being a director, all these things. Can you let us know of some of the biases that you've experienced in opera and how you are disrupting those things?
Well, you know, that question is so very interesting because there's so many times, and there's so many, right? Immediately what comes to mind are some of the tropes that are on stage. And there's a show specifically that I'm thinking of that has what we've deemed the magical Black person in the show. And when I saw it, I was like, okay, do I need to put that on stage, right? And sometimes we are not always in the position to disrupt. Sometimes we have to acquiesce. And that's the part that is very difficult, especially when you know more, you know better, you want to do something better.
Hmm.
And in this particular case, I just wasn't able to do it.
Okay.
Right. And so I'm conscious of still, trying to do things that will propel women, will propel people of color. Because again, representation is everything. And when you can see yourself on stage, then you see yourself largely in life. And that is so important for me as an administrator to make sure that representation is apparent. So casting, being able to cast in a certain way and making sure that the stage looks like the world is very important to me. I have a personal bias, and it's because of the way that I grew up. I grew up in Texas. Everything is big.
Everything is big.
The voices are big. Everything is big. So my ears are tuned to larger instruments.
Yeah.
However, when I hear a pristine instrument that may be a little smaller, it broadens my it broadens my perspective, because maybe I have to mic this person. Heavens forbid. But the quality of the instrument is really, really good. So why not showcase a beautiful instrument? That's what opera is all about. Making sure that we hear beautiful instruments all of the time, right? So if I have to put a little bit of amplification on, so what? I mean, so what? It's a good voice, right? You can't, if you put amplification on a bad voice, it's still going to be a bad voice. It's almost like AI. It's what you put into it. If it's bad information, it's going to kick out bad information. But if it's good information, it's going to be good. So if it's a good voice, amplify it a little bit. It's okay. If they do it in musical theater, it's okay. So again, I think it's just being open to some different kinds of things. And now non-binary issues with casting are a huge thing. And I ended up casting a person that was non-binary. And it was a beautiful voice. Again, I only saw the voice. I only heard the voice. And then when they showed up, I was like, oh my, what am I going to do? We had a great conversation. I said, well, you were hired for for male presenting roles.
Yeah.
But let's talk with the directors and figure out if there's something that we can do where we can, kind of
expand.
Expand and just neutralize the look, so that it's not so much male presenting, but something that would be more comfortable for that person. So again, it's with more information, you make different choices. And at the core of everything is that beautiful voice, and making sure that you're highlighting the beautiful voice. Yeah. Everything else will take care of itself.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing. I know that everything else will take care of itself. And when we create the opportunity to ask, what is the goal? What is the point? If in opera, our point is for people to have access to opera, to see themselves in opera, for opera to be thriving, we have to acknowledge that a lot of these operas that we present were created when everyone else was not in mind. They were not created with everybody else in mind, and that is okay. What are we doing to make sure people feel themselves represented in meaningful and healthy ways? What are we doing to open the invitation for the next generation of opera creators? I firmly believe, and this could be my bias, Mozart would look at us and be like, what are y'all doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are y'all doing?
Absolutely.
What are you doing? And that is okay as long as we name it and understand that if we have a goal for this to be an art form that represents the people, that includes the voices of the people, we have to look up and say, well, what people are speaking? Where are those
Right.
voices? I'm
Mhm.
going to turn this over to our heart participants. I believe you all have some questions for our wonderful panelists, starting with Jenna. What question do you have? Go for it.
So first of all, thank you so much for the great discussion and for all the insights and experiences you have shared. I personally resonate so much with everything everyone had said. So my first question is, so as a younger conductor in this profession in the opera world, what are some of the resources? Because we do, I think it's our obligation too to change the landscape and to work alongside with everybody else, because operas are big teams. It's not just music and between you and the musicians, it's everybody. So how can we as conductor to help shaping the landscape in the future?
Beautiful.
What are some resources that you recommend?
Go for it. I'm going to hand it off to Casey, Alfrelynn, and then Amy, if you'd like to add. Go for it.
I'm wondering if you can just be a little more specific, Jen, in terms of what you're asking.
Okay, for example, right now, I can, if I think about for myself, I think if I get an invitation to conduct opera, I will say yes. I don't think it's my choice right now. But however, I do also believe we have the ability to create opportunities. And for example, for conductors, we definitely have in the decision making that we can influence on the repertoire choices, etc. So maybe it's because my lack of experience understanding how this process works. So just any insights, guidance that where do I look, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big question.
Yes.
I remind myself that everyone can't do everything and everything all at once and everything in every show and everything in every, we can't, we may not be able to affect the casting, but maybe we can affect the experience that people have once they're there, so there's some advocacy. We may not be able to choose the show, but we can put some guardrails up so that as we're doing the show, people feel safe and heard. And, so, and then in the times when we can actually choose the repertoire or program the show or have some of these ground level decisions, then that's when we have to ask, well, is my own network, my own sense of who is available, is it wide enough? Who else do I need to reach out to? Who do I need to bring to the table? I may not have the personal connections myself, but these 4 or 6 other people do, or their 6 friends, and on from there. So I think we can't just turn a blind eye. We can't just reach a certain level of, now I'm at this table, so I'm just going to assimilate and call it a day, which is very hard if we are the only one there. I think that a lot of these changes are very hard to affect without 2 or 3 or 4 of us that care about these things. And that have a shared language and a shared understanding, whether that's 4 women, 3 women, 2 women. When we're the only one, we're not talking about a cultural change anymore. We're just talking about, mostly I'm trying to survive. You know what I mean? I mean, let me just say
That is true.
But
that's very true.
So I think what are the resources? I mean, I think if we bring all of ourselves to every situation and every environment, then that already will start to bring new questions to the fore, and make people maybe examine some things that they haven't thought of before. So I mean, that's a huge question that could be broken into a lot of areas, but I guess that's my stab at it right now.
Thank you for that. Alfrelynn, do you
Yeah.
have anything to add, or Amy?
I will just add, I think a conductor is a singer's best advocate. And, you know, as an administrator, I'm juggling a lot of different things, and I can't always be in the room. But as the conductor, you are there. You see what's going on. You understand from a singer's perspective what's happening. And I'll never forget Elizabeth Askren did the Magic the Marriage of Figaro, my first production here. I was straight off the plane from Dallas, and we had a few issues with a singer. She was there advocating for that singer the entire time. And it was good that she was in the room at the time. And she talked to me. She says, "This is what I think we should do. This is how I think we should handle this." And I was like, you know what? Okay, this is what we'll do then. And so it was great for me to have such support from her as a new person here, just kind of learning the landscape at Portland Opera. But that advocacy is just key to a room. It really is.
Nice. Shout out to Elizabeth, one of our hardest
Yes.
alumnus.
Yes.
Nice. Thank you for that question, Jen. And Amy, go for
I
it.
just want to add to that the Heart Institute is a big family. And I think I get emails and Facebook messages from women that have participated over the years. You know, here and there, they'll be visiting in town, or I'll be somewhere else working on something, and I'll have lunch with, you know, one of someone that I met through Heart. And in fact, just opera, opera is a huge family. So once you're here in Dallas and you meet, there's going to be so much going on that week. I don't know if you're here 1 or 2 weeks this year, but those connections are going to last a lifetime. And I think that when you do one opera, and then you're going to run into some of the same people, and you're going to know who your go-to people are. I've run into, when I'm playing elsewhere, I've run into, you know, all of a sudden you see the tenor that you knew from another opera, or you know, assistant conductor. We just had an assistant conductor, Ginchi, I guess it was, what did we just do? Traviata. She was one of our Heart conductors last year. And those connections are real. You can really feel the ones that are gonna stick with you. And so I think you're just starting out, but those are gonna be some people that you're gonna use as resources. Like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this and I don't know it very well, and I am working with a soprano, and, you know, or whatever. I don't agree with the director on this, and let me know what you would do here. Those people are going to be there for you.
Nice.
Thank
Thank
you
you for adding that. And thank you for that question, Jen. Anna, do you have a question you'd like to ask our panelists?
Yeah, I think it's probably more a discussion, because I don't know if it's an easy to answer question, but I guess when we were thinking about bias, of course we have our own, and then there are biases held against us or about us. And, you know, as women conductor, much like what Amy was saying, you know, there are these biases that exist. And very often I find that in some situations I have had, like interviews or chats, you're very often asked to talk about that, and, you know, to sort of reflect on that, which I, on the one hand, think is great because it's something that I want to bring attention. But on the other hand, very often I find that it is us who are sort of at the center of, let's say, the problem of the bias, that are talking about it, and the discussion doesn't leave that too much, or other colleagues are not sort of asked about how they see it or they would contribute. So I guess I always wonder, what can we do so those discussions, and for every different community or gender or whatever, it will be different, so that they, you know, kind of expand a bit outside, because this is everybody sort of, you know, we are society together in an orchestra and an institution. So if that makes sense, I know it's not an easy to answer, but just any thoughts on what you think about that?
No, actually, I'll go for this one if that's okay. Show them better than you can tell them, right? Live it and experience what it's like to celebrate yourself and to take up space to talk about the things you want to talk about, as opposed to trying to be the person who solves a problem that's not really your problem. You're just impacted by the problem. I'll say it's not your problem alone. in this, many times people, like even for this conversation, rather than saying, tell me all your biases and tell me all the things you've experienced, we've been very intentional about, and how do you celebrate that? And what does that look like for you to be in the space? What do you want to come of what happens once you're there? So many times it is also the invitation for others who may not have the same identity to be a part of the conversation, and to be a part of the conversation as listeners and as people who are sharing their own experiences. So I invite you to consider that when that happens and people are like, tell us all about, you also create an invitation for you to show them what it's like to celebrate you. And you also demonstrate to them what it's like to celebrate what you're doing, to celebrate those differences, and to be in community with you so that you're not the one carrying everything. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
adding to it. Would anyone else like to add, or does that feel good?
I love your answer, Quo. I think finding that common ground is always a great way to start, because people sometimes, I think, if they're surprised that you actually have so much common ground with them. I find that often, in fact. So it's like, no, I grew up eating that kind of food too, or actually that's my favorite sports team, or actually, but for me, you know, the music is such a refuge, and it's such of like the beacon, it's the guiding light, because that's what we're all here doing. You know, it's this music, and so we have that in common, regardless, you know, of where we're coming from and which identity, you know, we're putting forward, and or which identity people are choosing to see. So to just really be led by the passion that we have, and the skill that we carry, and the experience that we bring about the music, I find that to be a very, very, very safe and wonderful connection point. I mean, it's what I'm there to do. So when I'm confronted with stuff like that, I often just burrow myself into the work itself, and that becomes the answer.
And I'll also add, don't allow other people to limit what part of you bring to the work. One of the beautiful things we've heard today is Amy, I'm a mother, right? And a lot of times that becomes the space of, I need you to defend why you're here doing this and this. But again, I can show you why I'm here and what I'm doing better than I can try and confess and tell you. So it's this opportunity for everybody to be a part of the conversation, right? As if we were a chorus, everybody's voice is necessary. Certain voices need to be at the center for certain parts of the work. You can ensure that your voice is not at the center of defending while you're there, but of what it's like to celebrate your being there and all of you being there in collaboration with everyone else, right? We need other people to be a part of the conversation. Sometimes we don't need them to be talking. Sometimes they need to be quiet and they need to listen. And then sometimes they do need to speak up. So it's just a matter of where are we in this score of life as we're championing ourselves and our celebration of ourselves. So thank you for that question.
Thank you.
We have yeah, of course, Valerie and then CJ. Valerie, go for it.
First of all, thank you all so much for your honest answers on a very difficult and emotional topic for, I think, every woman. I just wanted to say I'm really proud of Portland Opera for championing, first of all, people of color, and just seeing the shift since the pandemic started, and seeing the young artists on that stage that have been mostly of color, and also your casting and your administration and the conductors that you choose. I think it's been groundbreaking. And I just want to say, as someone who grew up with Robert Bailey and grew up in that era and sing nothing but grand opera my entire life, and then sing for the first time women of color like myself on that stage was really empowering. And I just want to say thank you. And I just want to know, how did you accomplish that?
You're muted.
I don't even know. I just happen to be, you know, what is the saying? You don't have to get ready, you have to stay ready. Is that the saying?
Yeah, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Right. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And I think that's what happened. I for me personally, I just, alongside my opera career, I was also doing this administrative thing. And I just kept honing both skills. And it just kind of happened. I lucked up on Portland Opera and Sue Dixon, the general director, who again just championed a lot of things that were just we were supposed to be doing anyway, right? And she just allows me the freedom to make decisions about casting that I just didn't have before. My fall staff is pretty much completely brown, and they're good singers. They're great singers. We always program at least one piece by a woman each season. We're doing, and she spearheaded all of that. So it really, it comes from the top. And yet, if it doesn't come from the top and you don't have the support, then it's null and void. Now, can you be the person that gets in there and pushes everything? Absolutely. Because this is where we need to be. But it definitely makes it easier when there's somebody who gets it.
Yeah, for sure.
It really, really does.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your question, Valerie.
Yeah,
CJ, go ahead. Let us know your question. Bring us on home.
I would like to ask about like when choosing the repertoire, or like how to opera companies prioritize diversity in repertoire and the talent while staying true to the classical roots. Uh, in some way, or like the audience, how to convince them, or is that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
It's all about education. I mean, we have to do a whole education bit. I mean, and really in education and marketing. That's really where I'm going with this. Because I believe that there are a lot of people that don't recognize and realize that they really do love opera. And if we are real, and I think you said it early on, opera is music that was written originally for the people. That's what opera did back in Europe. When it came over here, we elevated it to this point and actually had people who just revered it and sent it up so high that we missed all of the people, just the people that it was actually created for. So now we're in a position where we're getting back to our opera roots, our real opera roots, and we're beginning to tell stories about our people. You know, whether that be The Righteous, or whether that be Loving versus Virginia, or whether that be Malcolm X, or whether that be whatever the story is, that we are beginning to tell those stories that actually represent who we are as people here, opposed to telling stories of other lands, other worlds, other times. Right. So it's an education. Now, is there balance? Does there have to be balance? Absolutely. Because we still, there's an education, we need to make sure that people understand where opera came from. So yes, we need to do that. And at the same time, we need to tell our own stories.
Yeah.
So.
And I will also add that what we do in operas, we tell stories about the human experience. Absolutely. Sometimes people say opera is universal. It depends.
Right.
Human emotion, human experiences are things that we share. Yep. So when we break down all of the extra fancy things that we love about opera, and we get to the core that this is a story about this person experiencing this thing, you may have experienced it, you may not have. But that's when we encourage people to check the bias, right? And to say that from one human to another human being, tell me your story. And we say as opera companies, when we choose the repertoire, from one storyteller to another, from one human to another, here's a story we'd like to tell, and we'd love to hear your stories as well.
Absolutely.
So it gets us to a space where you can balance out the things we've inherited and the things people expect opera to be, while expanding it to say, actually, no, your story is here as well.
Yeah.
Your story is a part of what we're doing as well. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for that question, CJ. We are at time, lovely, amazing folks. Thank you all so much for bringing your experiences and your passion and your questions and your courage to this conversation about bias. I hope that we continue to explore what this means in recognizing bias in opera and recognizing the opportunities for collaboration that come when we expand what we're doing and consider that there are different ways to go about doing what we do so well. Thank you to Dallas Opera. Thank you to the Hart Institute of Women Conductors. Toi, toi, toi to our current conductors in this particular cohort. And thank you all for joining us.